What are the bilateral injuries to Katie's neck consistent with?
With there being pressure on both sides of her neck.
And you stated that there was also injuries to the back of her neck?
Yes.
And what is that consistent with?
That there's anterior and posterior injury to the neck, as in something was large enough to cause injury to both sides of the neck.
So it should be all the way around her neck?
Yes.
Right? What, if any, injuries did you observe on the internal head exam of Katie?
She had subgaleal hemorrhage and subarachnoid hemorrhage. So subgaleal hemorrhage is kind of, it's hemorrhage like on the top of the skull cap. And then subarachnoid hemorrhage is on top of the brain tissue itself. And there's also temporalis muscle hemorrhage, which are muscles that are on the outside of the skull cap.
What does that mean?
The temporalis muscle hemorrhage means that there was something that caused injury to both sides of her head.
Ms. Gilman, could you please place Exhibit 298 on the screen? Could you please describe for the jurors what we're looking at?
Sure. So this is a very rough detail of the layers of the head. So you have skin, bone, and then layers of dura mater, which is kind of a very strong fibrous covering of the brain, and then arachnoid matter, which is underneath that, where your blood vessels are, and then pia mater is kind of in between, underneath here, where your cerebrospinal fluid accumulates.
And where did you observe injury to Katie McLean's head?
So the subgaleal hemorrhage would be underneath the skin and above the skull, so along kind of this passageway.
Okay.
And then the subarachnoid hemorrhage would be in this area, basically showing that there was injury that caused the blood vessels to bleed.
And the injuries that you observed on Katie's head, what did they tell you about timing of those injuries?
That they were also probably perimortem because there is hemorrhage there. So there was still some level.
Before that?
Yes.
Where on Katie, I know you showed us the layers, but I believe you said something about bilateral injuries. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yes, so again, your head has a right and left side. So she had temporalis muscle hemorrhage. So the temporalis muscles are kind of these thin muscles that are on the sides of your skull, and they cover some of the blood vessels that go into the skull cap. And then there was also bilateral subarachnoid hemorrhage. So your brain has a right and left side as well. So there was hemorrhage on both sides of the brain.
And what are the injuries in her head that you observed evidence of?
That there was some level of blunt force injury to the head.
What other parts of her body did you examine on the internal examination?
All of the internal organs are evaluated.
What, if anything, did you observe regarding her respiratory system?
She had pulmonary congestion and edema, as well as pleural effusions, which are accumulations of fluid along the lungs.
What is that evidence of?
That there was an increase in fluid either through inhalation or some process caused there to be excess fluid within her chest cavity.
And the amount of fluid, what would that tell you about the timing of when that was taken in?
It wouldn't. That's not predictable.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The amount of fluid is not really a prediction of timing. It's just that it's there.
And how much fluid is that?
There was 120 milliliters on each side. So about 1/10 of a liter.
So would that be indicative of the body being placed in water?
Yes, it can be.
And as far as timing, would that show that it was either pre-mortem or post-mortem?
I couldn't make that prediction.
Okay. And what else did you observe in the respiratory system or in the internal examination of Katie?
Again, that her lungs were congested and had edema, which is a buildup of fluid within the lung tissue itself.
What does that mean?
Again, so there was a buildup of fluid. So again, with the pleural effusion, it kind of plays hand in hand that there was an excess of fluid within her lung tissues.
What, if any, effect would being submerged in water have on a body?
Can you be more specific?
Or how would it affect an autopsy if a body had been submerged in water prior to you performing your autopsy?
Depends on how. Kind of depends on how long they've been there. To be honest, if they haven't been in the water long, then there's not much effect on the body. If they've been there for a while, it can cause an increase in the timing of decomposition of the body.
And was Ms. McLean's body decomposed at all?
Yeah.
What evidence did you collect from Katie McLean's examination?
For evidence, so in case like this, the standard is to do head hair, pubic hair if available, and then right and left nail clippings as well as blood.
And did you collect the fingernails of Katie McLean?
Yes.
What did you do with them once they were collected?
I packaged them into small manila envelopes, and then through a chain of custody, they are given to the police department for them to process however they do.
And you stated that you also generally take blood, is that right?
Yes.
And I believe you testified earlier that you take blood for toxicology.
Yes.
Was blood taken from the body of Katie McLean?
Yes.
Was it sent for toxicology?
Yes.
What were the results of the toxicology?
Her blood was positive for ethanol, which is like drinking alcohol, and caffeine, so coffee.
What level of alcohol?
A 0.098.
What does that level tell you?
That she had some level of alcohol in her system.
How does that level affect someone?
It depends on the person and their.
If you could just wait 1 moment for the siren stops, thank you.
Okay. It depends on the person and the level of their habit of drinking. So our, I guess, federal level, legal level for intoxication, I believe, is a 0.08. But if a person has a regular drinking habit, then they tend to build a tolerance to alcohol. And so a higher level may not equal to them being intoxicated versus a person who doesn't drink often.
After conducting all of your examination, were you able to form an opinion as to the cause of death of Katie McLean?
Yes.
And what was your opinion as to cause of death?
Strangulation.
What information caused you to conclude that Katie's cause of death was strangulation?
The culmination of the injuries of the anterior and posterior neck, along with the hemorrhages of the eye.
What is a death certificate?
It's a legal document that declares the cause and manner of death.
Did you sign a death certificate for Katie McLean?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I'm showing you what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 281. Do you recognize it?
Sure. This is for this township's death certificates, yes.
And is that the death certificate that you signed off on for Katie McLean?
Yes, I do mine digitally, and then they're propagated depending on the county.
Thank you. If I could just have one moment, Your Honor. I'm sorry, you stated that you determined the cause of death for Katie McLean to be strangulation, is that right?
Yes.
And is that to a degree of medical certainty based on your training and experience?
Yes.
Okay. And you also have an opinion based on a degree of medical certainty on whether Katie McLean was deceased prior to being placed in the water?
No.
And you stated that you had taken the fingernail clippings of Katie McLean and you sent those to the state police, is that right?
I believe so. I'm not sure which department actually took them, but I'm assuming state police.
And what about the blood that you took? Was that sent to the DNA lab?
I'm sorry, I apologize. I object to the I'm assuming it's state police. This is called chain of custody.
Okay, sustain. Rephrase that last question, please.
So are you aware that the state police was involved in this investigation?
Yes.
And when you take samples or fingernail clippings, blood from during an autopsy, do those things get sent to the state police crime lab for testing?
It follows a chain of custody, and I'm not involved in the chain of custody once I sign off on my portion of it. So I can't say for certain that they went to the state police.
Okay. Would it be usual for blood and fingernail clippings to be sent to the state crime lab for testing after you have taken them?
If they requested it, yes.
Could I have one moment,
You
please,
may.
Your Honor? I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, medical examiner on the stand. Cause of death is not at issue here. Everybody knows that she was strangled to death. The defendant admitted it. He says he did it sort of by accident in this drunken fight. Let's bring in Jeffrey Wolf. He's a criminal defense attorney in Denver, Colorado. For both sides, a medical examiner, even in a case where there's no how did this happen, it can do a lot of, it can bring the victim back into the courtroom. It can, especially if there are photos, there's a dead person. It brings a sense of reality to jurors. This was very clinical, the back and forth here, and one of the defense characterizations is that they were both drunk and they've been drinking these martinis. She's at a .09. Give me your assessment of how this witness either helps, hurts either side.
Well, I mean, medical examiners, in my experience, cut both ways, right? Because, like you said, they bring the victim into the courtroom, essentially. They paint the picture of the deceased in a way that can't be done really any other way. There are autopsy photos that typically come in and they describe the injuries that the person suffered. And a lot of times they do what we just saw them do, which is to minimize the bad facts about the deceased. .096, right? You can hear that in any trial that involves intoxication when it is a defendant as drunk. It is legally drunk. If you get a DUI, you have a vehicular homicide case, the prosecutor and anyone else from a forensic perspective are going to pound their fist on the table about how that person is legally, per se, drunk. But what did the medical examiner do there? She said, well, it really depends on how it affects an individual person. If you drink a little bit more, that might not affect you as much. So she softened the blow there for the deceased, for the victim in this case, in a way that she would not have done it if it had been the BAC of the defendant in a case. And so, again, they cut both ways depending on who they're working for and who they're coming in to testify about. And if I am the defense attorney in this case, I am going to absolutely hammer that bias.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, because she went out of her way as the medical examiner to educate the jury on, well, to your point, maybe she wasn't drunk at all, because if she was used to drinking at a .09, and does it metabolize afterwards at all? I mean, is that it? .09 when you die, is that it? Is it, or does your body bring it down a little bit?